another episode of The Frustrated CEO. Being the first of the year, today we're going to explore the cost of poor or uneven strategy execution. Can you afford it? You as a CEO with your senior team may have spent the last part of last year or the beginning of this year creating or refreshing your strategic plan. This is the same time of year when you're ready to get that plan into action, actually get things done, and finding yourself feeling frustrated with another year of poor or uneven success. If this lands true for you, you are not alone. One of the biggest inhibitors to business growth is an organization's inability to execute on their strategy with focus and consistency year after year. We often refer to this as an organization's execution gap. You and your executive team probably put considerable effort and many resources into the creation of a plan, your strategic plan. The question is, how many resources have you put into actually getting down to the business of delivering on the desired results of your plan, your execution process? So I'm asking you, does this sound familiar? If so, you are part of the roughly 80 to 85% of companies who actually have a plan, yet fail to deliver consistently on their strategy. So we ask you to take a moment to reflect on where you and your company are on successfully executing your plan. Let's say use a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is you got this covered and are creating meaningful results. 1 is you can't really get on the court to execution. It's not meant as a judgment, it's meant as an assessment. It's a place that you can start to act from. So now we're inviting you to ask yourself, how is this affecting your business? What is the real cost of you to be poorly delivering on your plan? And more importantly, how do you close that execution gap? We see over and over again that a successful strategic planning process, and I highlight the word process here, is more than just good business. It's good practice that is good for your business. It's an ongoing process that, if done correctly, has the power to transform your organization's vision into tomorrow's realities. So welcome, Leb and Patrick. I know you both work with companies through this annual strategic planning process to help them achieve their ongoing desired results. I'm just curious what you would add here in reflection on poor and uneven execution.
Okay. Thank you, Patsy. There's a few things that come to mind for me just to kind of get us rolling. One is the impact that the plan and getting it to the people and getting the flywheel turning and the tremendous amount of time that can be wasted. And when that time is wasted, and if you go to the adage of time is money, money's being wasted. And you can start off either what you might call hot, or you can start off, and here's another one that comes up for me, is stutter starts. You make some progress, you fall back, you make some progress, you hit a roadblock, and that can negatively impact morale. And if that's your first quarter, then you're still looking at 3 quarters to go. So how do you recover from that? Couple of others that really stand out to me. One is there can be just a lack of clarity about the strategy itself. And some people refer to this as the marathon effect, where the people who created that strategic plan, they've been at that for a while. They've had those difficult conversations. They've fought to come to alignment around this strategic plan. So if you think of a marathon, they're the elite runners who are out in front. But if you're somewhere in the middle or you're somewhere in the back, you're running a different marathon. So, it raises the question of clarity about the plan. And the other thing that, ties to it is communication about the plan. So we often, if you go to someone like John Cotter, he says, create urgency and communicate more than you think you need to. And that can be uncomfortable for a CEO. That can be uncomfortable for executives where they feel like they've already communicated. So let's get on with it. But there may be more communication required than than it actually occurs. And I'll stop with communication plans don't always clearly strategic planning doesn't always clearly identify decision-making authority. And so you get people who may, with all good intent, make a decision that someone thinks is theirs or someone disagrees with or isn't really in the plan, but they're doing the best they can. And so we've run into, I think, all of us, strategic plans without clear decision-making authority. And that can create lots of unnecessary problems or slow us down or cause us to not execute and meet the goals of the plan.
Yeah, I would add, and hello, my colleagues, love you both.
Hey.
I would add, well, it's one of my favorite sayings, there's no ROI in strategic planning. The strategic planning process is usually it's a bunch of high-priced executives, and very often a high-priced consultant or team of high-priced consultants locked away in a room for anywhere from 2 to 5 days, sometimes longer, and all you're doing is coming up with big ideas, and it's 100% sunk cost. You're just investing a lot of money. So if you, as the CEO listening to this, if you've been through that process, it's an expensive process. The ROI only comes by crossing things off lists and checking boxes and actually executing the plan that all of these high-priced executives and consultants came up with when they were locked away. And so without the execution, it's an absolute waste of time and money. And it's frustrating. And right, and it's why it's actually one of the impetuses for us actually coming up with the frustrated CEO, because the overwhelming majority of new clients, when I start with new clients, it's usually one of the top things on the list about what frustrates them is we're just not executing. We're missing deadlines. We're not as productive as I know we can be. We're not executing our strategic plan. So to me, a conversation today about execution is, boy, if you, the CEO, can even get 5%, 10% better in the organization at executing, that has an exponential return. It ripples through the organization and it has an exponential return on the bottom line. So, I'm obviously, I'm passionate about this. And in fact, I would say this too, it's also why we, Leb, Patsy and I, why we don't work with clients anymore on just strategic planning. I used to. In the beginning, I would be that high-priced executive, high-priced consultant in the room doing strategic planning. And then I'd leave thinking, great, you've got this. You, company, you've got this. You can now execute this plan. You were here when you created it. You know what the plan is. You know what to do. And then you circle back 3, 6, 9 months later to check in and see how things are going. And what do you hear? Well, we started like gangbusters right out of the gate. And then, well, pandemic happened, or then we didn't have the right people in the right seats, or we had a lack of accountability, whatever it is that got in the way, and we just got off track and we stopped. And that's why we don't do that anymore. For us, if we're doing the planning, we're also going to walk out the execution with you just to help, because I want to see that ROI. I know you want to see that ROI on the plan that you're creating. So that's it. That's just my, I mean, I'm not telling the CEO, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just telling you, as Patsy said, you're not alone. It is incredibly frustrating to have a great plan, and it's incredibly costly not to execute it.
Great, thanks, Patrick. I think it's good to recognize that the strategic plan is a useful tool. It's not the tool that you need to actually, create what you want. That it is, and again, as I said earlier, a kind of an entire process, and that process is only as strong as your culture, which goes to your point about Communication Lab, your organization's readiness, and your organization's ability to consistent deliver on the plan. So I'm going to reiterate a few things that Leb just said, but as some of the components that contribute to building a successful strategic execution process. Leb, you mentioned have a clear, simplified, and defined direction. Effective communication, yes, across all stakeholders throughout the organization. And as you said, over communicate, over communicate, over communicate. One we often use, and I will mention today, is that stay focused on strategic priorities. Popular term these days is about shiny objects and how distracted we can be by shiny objects. We often refer to strategy as the art of exclusion. So once you decide what your priorities are, stay focused on them. Now, getting into some more of tactical, have a process for consistently delivering on those priorities in an orderly and systemic way. And most importantly, or one that's closest to my heart and one we're really going to focus the rest of our episode on today, is developing your next level of leaders to effectively execute.
That's great.
Well, while each of these are important, and we'll cover some in future episodes, again, we're going to today focus on developing your next level of leaders. As Patrick said, so much time and effort is spent by you and your senior team on the strategic planning process that you think you've got it all covered. And you forget that to really effectively execute, you need key people on your team and your organization to implement for you. We often encourage companies to look for employees. So how do you build? How do you build your next level of leaders who want to execute? We encourage people to look for employees who bring a passion and a commitment for the topic or a specific expertise or perspective, and who actually want to get involved. We also see that it's really important to engage those who are closer to the day-to-day operational issues of the organization. Their participation in owning the plan is the execution edge that you're looking for. A lot of times you're going to need, in addition, some subject matter experts, but they're more resources than the people that are going to get the work done. And no process, no group of people, however, guarantees action. Patrick mentioned your ROI. ROIs require action. And to do that, people have to believe in shared goals. They have to trust one another. They have to be willing to cooperate, learn new tools, and to step into new territory. Recently, I've been describing, as we've worked more and more with the next level of leaders, that this group of people almost become the knuckle in the organization. So they know the day-to-day operations. They know how to get stuff done. They're used to focusing on the daily activities. And now they're being asked to look up and look strategically and to coordinate with the senior team. That is not a common position for a lot of people who are working their way up through your organizations. So in addition to action, it also requires that you have champions and leaders at all levels of the organization. You have to set priorities. Again, less is more in driving focus and alignment. And that is really hard because there's a lot of good creative ideas to get all of us off track. You also have to develop a meeting rhythm. Leb, I know this is one of your soapboxes that I use all the time, but develop a meeting rhythm, a daily, monthly, and quarterly focus on implementation that gives you and your team the time to make better, faster decisions, We're going to ask Gleb and Patrick to speak to this in just a minute. I've got a few other items, but to know your data, qualitative and quantitative feedback. Just because you have a plan doesn't mean that you're going to go from point A to point B, or that you're going to go to from point A to point B in a straight line. Quite the contrary. Almost daily, but certainly monthly and quarterly, you're going to get new data, and it's going to encourage you or cause you to reevaluate, are we on the right track, and make course corrections. And then every team needs the right tools to do the job. One of our core foundational pieces is working from common language and common tools, so that you're promoting new behaviors and new actions. So Gleb, Patrick, as I said, do you have anything that you'd add to this list?
Well, Patsy, yeah, I was thinking of it, in kind of, so what questions do we ask of CEOs who, they've got the plan, okay. And, some of the things that come up for me kind of in the context of the questions that I know at times we all ask of leaders and CEOs is, what are you most afraid of in this plan? Like, what do you see as the biggest challenge? What might keep you up at night about this plan? And if there's nothing in it, that's kind of information in itself, right? Is there something missing in this plan that where people will go, oh, okay, cool, that's a plan. Like, but I'm not inspired. And so, there is this relationship between inspiration and a little bit of natural fear, where you're on the edge of your seat. And I think that, that's something that comes to mind. The other, are you resourcing to the plan? A lot of what we see in failure to execute is people are not resourced well enough. They may, their conversation may be very different. It's like, well, I'm already like 98% busy, and now I've got strategic priorities or objectives. So are you resourcing correctly to the plan? And how do you even know that? I mean, do you make it up because you're a leader, or do you actually engage your people and talk to them about it? There's a question for me about how visible are you in this strategic plan and the prioritization, the execution of the plan? Are you leading the charge? Are you, are you a coaching CEO? Are you a cheerleading CEO? Or, are you a great listener? Because, there's always the unplanned that has to be dealt with in the strategic plan. So I think, those are just some of the things that I would think of from, we've talked to plenty of CEOs who get frustrated, and some of the things that, maybe the last thing I'd say is, do you know when to look in the mirror and take responsibility yourself, or do you know when to look out the window and really give a lot of stated appreciation and acknowledge people for the progress that they're making or the hard work they're putting in? And so, that whole notion of the window and the mirror, I think is an important question or something to offer when we work with the CEOs and the leaders of the company.
Great.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Patrick, I saw you shaking your head.
Yep.
Yeah, gosh,
Jump
there were
in
so
there.
many, there were so many points I wanted to just agree with and then even ask questions. And so what earlier Patsy, you mentioned meeting rhythm. You said, obviously that's, I think you and I have adopted, I should say, we've adopted Gleb's urgency on communicating to CEOs the importance of meeting rhythm. That whatever it is you as the CEO are talking about, that's what your people are going to figure out is important. And therefore, if weeks go by or months go by, and it happens, months go by without having a strategic execution meeting with your team, and then without setting the expectation for your team that they should be having strategic execution meetings with their people, if those conversations aren't happening, then people will quickly forget about it. They'll figure out that what really is important to you is whatever it is you're talking about. So it is, meeting rhythm is important. And I think, yeah, I would say, gosh, at least once a month. I think once a month is a good rhythm. I'm certainly open to other suggestions, Patsy and Leb. But then I would add, it's not just about meeting. This is a mistake that we see a lot of organizations make, a lot of CEOs in particular who are in the room, whether they're leading this mistake or whether they're allowing this mistake, is what we think is a strategic execution meeting really is an operations meeting. And that's where we'll come together and we follow the same agenda that we have, that we use in our weekly check-ins, or we'll do a round robin. Hey, what's going on in your department? What's going on in your department? Really, those are operations meetings. To me, the best strategic execution meeting doesn't get down into the weeds of trying to solve that many issues. It's going through our strategic priorities, hitting the main points. So when we do a strategic execution meeting, we're talking about organization culture, what's working, what issues do we see, and what do we need to do about it? We're not going to solve it today, but what do we need to do? Who's going to own it? Great, let's get that assigned, and then let's move on to the next issue, because we could spend the rest of the time today just talking about the culture and talking about the people and talking about what's wrong and talking about how to fix it. But that's not the purpose of this meeting. That's an operations meeting. That's solving the problem. This is what are the obstacles in the way of our strategic plan? So after culture, we would talk about the strategic priorities. Do we based on what we now know, based on data in the pool, that as we've tried things and learned things, Patsy, you talked about that, as we've gathered data, do we still have the right plan? What adjustments do we need to make? Let's identify the issues. Let's assign them. Let's make sure we've got dates for when people are going to bring that answer back to the table. And then let's move on to the next thing. And so it should move at a good pace, but stay strategic and not get so down into the weeds that you often see that when that meeting gets so down into the weeds, you lose at least 80% of the room. You see it. You see people start to check out because the issue doesn't pertain to them, or we've beaten this issue to death. And a good strategic execution meeting should move at a good pace. It should involve everybody. It should be popcorn ideas and capturing all the tasks and the assignments and then moving on. And it should stay at that high level. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I appreciate you bringing that piece up, because it does lead me to inviting the CEOs to actually put themselves in the shoes or in the seats of the people they're asking to do strategic execution, because what you're describing is some of the stumbling blocks that next level of leaders may find themselves having as they try to execute, because they're used to meetings that are getting things solved. Let's jump on this. So even developing a strategic mindset or a company-wide organizational ready or culture view is not business as usual for even your people that you've identified that you want to move up through your organization. So I think it's really important to understand that that's a new muscle, so to speak, that a lot of people are going to have to build, because they are so focused on getting things done.
Yeah, that's really good. And the other thing that came up for me when really both of you are speaking is, Lencioni wrote a book called Death by Meeting for a reason. And how many times have we walked in and adjusted the meeting rhythm to actually have less meetings as opposed to have more?
Yes.
It depends on the plan. It depends on the people. It depends on the readiness of the people, and at that middle level who are not as used to perhaps the strategic thinking cap that you put on. But there are plenty of times we walk in and people say, I don't have time to execute because I'm in meetings all day. And that may be just right there, a key to whether strategic execution is successful or not. So I just wanted to add that in. And
it's a great point.
Leonie, if you're listening, here's a plug for your book. It's a good book. You have many good books. We love you.
Yes. And one of you just mentioned the kind of middle manager. So often you find people that have been invited to be part of this execution team are from other departments or from other work groups. So suddenly you find yourself in a room with people that are your peers, but not kind of your peers. And so how do you build a foundation of trust and safety
Mhm.
so that this team can learn to work together, to step up and deliver when it's outside their normal comfort zone.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is that often the senior executives, on the other hand, may not want to let go.
Mm.
You know, you've put a lot of time and energy and focus in developing this plan. And it's often, so, I mean, reflect on that, anybody listening in. How hard is it for you to let go of this plan that you've kind of poured your heart and soul into, and invite others to help be a part of the creation of it? So we see that going in both directions. It does remind me of a construction company we worked with not too long ago, where they brought senior middle-level managers in from 5 different locations, and they really struggled to get, you know, some traction to get going. And I was working with the senior team leader one day, and he just kind of slapped his hand on his feet. He goes, "I get it. Nobody on this team knows how to think strategically." And it was, I mean, there were a few people, but he did, but it was just like, how do we get anywhere when we don't even see this whole realm of strategic thinking, of aligning with our goals and our missions? And it was quite a moment. He was rather dumbfounded by it. And I'm like, you're right. So
Yeah,
it's a good thing to remember. Yeah, Patrick.
I almost want to ask each of you. So, what is a sign or two for a CEO, for our CEO who's listening? What's a sign or two that your team is having a hard time switching hats? Because they are two different hats. There is my operations hat. I've got to get things done. I've got customer deliverables. I've got internal deliverable, whatever it is. I've got my to-do list. What are some indications that a leader could be having a hard time? I'll start off, and it's here's what I see at the table. You when I'm focused more on my operations hat and not wearing my strategic hat, I'm more worried about my own kingdom, my own fiefdom, and making sure that I've got the resources that are needed, that I've got the authority to do what is on my plate, and I'm not necessarily as willing or as ready or able to sacrifice maybe something from my team for the good of the whole company. That's typically when I think about being strategic, it's taking off my functional hat and putting on the company hat and thinking more broadly, recognizing that when there are competing resources, competing priorities, there needs to be that push and pull to make sure that we win as a company. And it may mean that my function is a little bit harder than it would have been otherwise. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Total
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
Important distinction too.
So what are some of the ways? How have you seen specific leaders have a hard time making the shift from operational to strategic?
It's a good question. Um, I mean, let's be honest. I think we all struggle with that at times, right? I think some of that can also be maybe more ensured by reading something together prior to strategic meetings or strategic planning. Um, some of that can be more about having a discussion ahead of time about, so what is this distinction between strategy and tactics?
Mm.
Right. I wrote down in the let's get practical part, which we haven't gotten to yet. I wrote down, make sure you've done strategic planning and not just a review of what we did last year and adding 10% or 7% or 5% to it and
Great
calling
point.
that the plan. Yeah, that may be an outcome, but is that strategic planning? And, you know, we know that ultimately, no, that's not strategic planning. But we have certainly walked into a lot of organizations before we've gotten the chance to work with them. And we're talking to them about what they've done in the past. And we know what we're looking at. We're looking at an operational review with some tweaks to it. And, you know, the budget game of, you know, so what can we sell, or, you know, how much more are we going to add? And that's the plan. And so there's a lot of work to be done. Some of it, I think, ahead of time, or in the process, if it's falling into that operational tactical space that sometimes we just can't help but avoid, calling it out. Um, really interesting, Patsy, with someone who, had an aha moment, slapped their lap or whatever, and recognized something. And then, the question is, so what do you do about that?
Right.
Right. If you think that, you have been trained and have the ability to recognize strategy, and you like the strategic element, and you participate in strategic planning from that perspective, and you're surrounded by people who aren't quite there yet, what do you do? And that really gets into strategic leadership, right? And there are lots of things to do. So we'll pause there. But that was one of the things that I put in Let's Get Practical, is make sure that your strategic plan is actually strategic.
Yeah, and in some regards, many of the things we've talked about, certainly what you're talking about here, Leb, is like set yourself up for success.
Mm-hmm.
It's a counterintuitive move to go slow so you can go faster, and having the right framework, understanding that's going to require new tools and distinctions, new ways of working together, is, I think, setting yourself up for success, and knowing that there's going to be adjustments along the way.
Right. Right.
I mean, some other points I've thought about is, like, first of all, you have to confirm that the executive team is committed and ready to support the next level of leaders to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not in place, then all the other processes are going to be for naught.
Right.
And then
Right.
probably to your point, also having a clear idea of what you're asking leaders to do, and you're giving them the time and the resources to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think, some of the practical things, again, that CEOs and leaders can do that sometimes get overlooked, or you can use some of the tools that, the common language, the common tools that you do have in your toolkit. So, if you're wanting to involve people in the middle, so to speak, use an affinity process, get everybody thinking about a particular strategic idea, run a mind map, or, get in touch with us at, frustratedceo.com. We'll share some information about that, but there are lots of ways to get people involved. But the ultimate for me is involve people that are closest to whatever the strategic objective is. It's so different when they've been involved to some degree in the process, or their feedback. Maybe they've been called into strategic planning to give a report out on a particular piece that winds up showing up in the plan. It's very different than those who say, okay, we've got the plan, and we hand it over to you and say, okay, go execute. So involvement, I think, is really important. I think there are practical things we can recommend or do as leaders and CEOs to do that. One thing that hasn't really been talked about yet that I see often missing is, and it depends on the size of the company and the world. We're all dispersed right now. We're all working remotely. We're all working in different ways with each other, mostly digital, but promoting and allowing for some relationship building to occur. I can really want to execute beautifully with you, Patsy, and with you, Patrick, and, add, Shelley or someone else into the mix. But if we don't know each other, it's harder to do it. If we haven't had some time to get to know each other, build a relationship, talk about some things that matter to each other. And that if you're a regional type company, if you have different locations involved, people may not have done that yet. So I think that's another thing that we would offer in terms of being practical about how to have the middles involved, how to have the plan be executed successfully.
Good. And Patrick, and as we all know, I think it's not something that happens overnight. So it's a process that gets built and integrated into an organization, and will take, at least a couple of years.
Yeah, I usually will advise a CEO. I mean, you didn't get here overnight. So to get from where you are to where you really want to go, that high performing organization where your leaders have learned how to become strategic, where execution is part of the DNA of the company. It's very often a 3 to 5 year journey that involves a few cycles of strategic planning and learning all those things, learning how to be strategic. It requires strategic leadership, Leb, as you mentioned, and consistency. And I think just giving people the time and space to grow and grow into it. They can. We've seen leaders who have been very operational become very strategic and start to speak the language of strategic execution and then begin to cascade it down. But it takes time. And so when I think about what would it mean, what would I put on a let's get practical, I think, as we talked about earlier, making sure that the conversations we're having about strategic execution stay strategic and don't become operational. That's really important. Otherwise, people won't want to come to a strategic execution meeting. They'll dread it, and they just won't be facilitating execution, which is the whole point of them. The other thing in this, two things we haven't talked about yet. One is keep it simple. Although Patsy, you did say earlier, you're talking about how many strategic priorities. Make sure you're focusing on the right strategic priorities. I think we've all worked with clients who have had, in some cases, massive volumes. They've got books, just like 50-page strategic plans, and they're just so complex that it's like everything is a priority and therefore nothing's a priority. So typically when we do a strategic plan, we do simplified strategic planning. We're looking for, I recommend 5 good, solid strategic priorities that you can really focus on and make traction and headway. And you do that, and a lot of the ills in the organization will go away. And then the last thing I'll add is, and I remember when I used to be inside of companies, and you'd go to a meeting and everybody writes his or her own tasks down on his or her own pad, right? So we're sitting around the table and we're assigning tasks and priorities. I'm writing mine down. Nobody else is writing mine on their pad. They're writing theirs. So if I come back to the next meeting and I haven't done my priorities, the overwhelming majority of the time, if I didn't own that out loud, nobody else knew. And so it was just easy in a setting like that. It's easy for things to get dropped, for balls to get dropped, for things to fall through the cracks. So I recommend having a really good one central repository of all the tasks and all the owners and all the dates, and that's what we're working from. And that when there's a task to be assigned, it doesn't go on my list, it goes on that list, so that we all just have, it's not so that we can hang people for not getting things done, but it's so that we don't lose track of what's really important and what we've all agreed needs to get done to help keep us executing.
Great, good reminders. So on the heels of that, so it's as you begin to set a framework for success and work the framework and adjust it, the gap that we've been talking about, which may be poor or uneven strategic execution, starts to close. More and more initiatives get implemented, and your team will actually start to experience a sense of satisfaction while building measurable results. And as a result, which is Patrick was talking about, then that allows you to engage more people in your organization. It allows you to push it down through the organization. And ultimately, you'll have a strategy that's embedded and understood by everyone in the company. When this starts to happen, innovation and creativity, in addition to just fun and work satisfaction, start to rise. So in close, some of the lessons we've learned today around strategic execution. Go slow to go fast. That is, set a framework for success. monitor, adjust, evaluate that framework, and keep going. Strategic execution is challenging. It's also meaningful work with immense rewards, both for the growth of the company, but also for the people involved. And as Leb mentioned, we've got to create open space for genuine connection and learning about each other, learning about ourselves, learning about the organization, so that we work effectively and meaningful together. So this concludes another episode of The Frustrated CEO. We thank you for joining us today to explore a key component of business growth that may be causing you some frustrated moments. In close, we ask you to consider one small adjustment you may be able to make to the way you are executing on your strategy. A small adjustment that will support you and your senior team to get more focused and aligned, and to find the people in your organization that are going to be partners with you in that. Patrick and Lev, I thank you for your great examples of where you've seen this in action, and for your work to help other CEOs reduce their level of frustration around this important topic of strategic execution.
Thank you, Betsy.
For some more aspects, as Leb and both people mentioned, on Let's Get Practical, and for a readiness overview around the whole strategic planning process, please visit our website, thefrustratedceo.com, to download. Thanks again for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.